When you're talking about the liberal paradigm, the progressive paradigm, everybody operates within it. But the second you don't grant it, you say this worldview, I'm not playing within this worldview, I'm playing with a different worldview, they're lost. They're done.
Yeah.
The only way that these people know how to communicate is if you already accept their preconceived notions of progressive and liberal worldviews. And if you don't accept those, they're totally lost. Much like a vampire, you have to agree to invite the worldview in, or else it doesn't do anything. It does nothing.
One thing that I think Andrew is really good at, not just debating, but really being with precision, honing in on topics that people assume without questioning. And that is, in one case, the issue of rights. I know that Andrew's had debates with people like Tim Pool and Dave Smith and others, where it gets into this issue of libertarian rights or rights theory. And Andrew, why is it that you think this is so effective in terms of getting people to question what they mean of when they speak of their positions being based on rights?
The reason I like to hone in on this idea that rights are a figment, at least how we perceive them in the term of positive and negative rights in modernity, they're a complete fiction. They're completely made up. They're a product of the mind. What I'm trying to always do is force a person to evaluate this so that they understand that if there are indeed rights, if that is something we can come to, then they're going to have to be divinely grounded, or you're not going to ground them at all. It's not going to be possible to ground any type of right, period, unless it comes from the divine, and that's it. And Tim Pool fell prey to this, like many, many other prominent libertarians like Dave Smith, ended up having to essentially concede. But if that's the case, and it has to be grounded in God, then that must mean that we have to follow his laws too, right, Jay? So if we have rights which are grounded there, then you're making the concession that God is real, right? He must be, because you believe in these inalienable rights which are given to you. So how come we can throw the rest of it out? Why is that allowed?
Yeah, I noticed too, not just with libertarians that maybe are more on the conservative side of things, but when you've debated even the more radical progressives and the feminists, they also tend to appeal to this amorphous idea of rights, and yet nobody really seems to ever explain what a right is, or how it is, or where it is.
Well, I'll explain
why
it.
They just think it is.
Yeah, I'll explain what a right is. A right is a figment of your imagination, which was completely and totally made up, and it's used interchangeably with what is actually true, which is force. Yeah, every idea that you have, secular idea that you have of rights, is actually just an appeal to force. You have a right to a gun. You have as much of a right to a gun as you have force to protect your right to own one. You have as much a right to speech as you have force to protect this right to speech and every other right thereof. And it doesn't matter if it's positive or negative, right? Every right is going to be an entailment of force and what I could call force doctrine, an appeal to men to force people to do the thing that whatever the social paradigm requires that they do. And any right that you would appeal to, whether it's a human right, a natural right, whatever it is, if it's not divinely grounded, then you just made that up. You just made it up out of thin air. And if you make it up out of thin air, then I can make up all sorts of rights too. As long as I have the force requisite for that, I'm in good shape.
On this topic of rights, and I really like the way that you elucidate this idea of force doctrine and how it has to be enforced, because I think people don't even think about the fact that when we live in Western free markets and freedom-based societies, and people think that, well, I'm in the West, and my feminism is something that I get as a right because I'm a, and the government gives me these rights. What would you say to a feminist or somebody on the left who argues that the rights that they have come to them because the government has given it to them?
Then they're making my point for me. What they're saying is that they have a right to do whatever the government is willing to use force to allow them to do. And that's it. It's that simple. Feminists have no force to do anything. All they can do is whine. All they can do is whine and complain, right? They have to appeal to men to utilize force to give them whatever rights they want. How can I demonstrate this? Let's look at most of the world. Most of the world have no rights. And who can they appeal to for them? Only to men. Only to men. They can never appeal to themselves. There's never been a single instance, not one single, and I've looked through the entire historic standard, all recorded history that I can find, I've never found a single instance of overthrowing the chains of oppression by force. They've never done it even one time. They always have to appeal to men. And this is what force doctrine is stating, is that really for feminists and for their rights are actually just granted to them by men. That's actually what's going on. Men are granting them their rights, and men can take those rights away. So you better hope that men appeal to the divine for the grounding of these rights. Secularists and humanists have no answer for this.
Yeah, their religion, their worldview, even though it's irreligious, it's a-religious, actually is a kind of religion that the more consistently it's played out actually leads to brutality and leads to tyranny. And this very forced doctrine that you're talking about, people don't even think about how, the supposed rights that you have as a feminist, you're only allowed to have that because society allows you to have that with this forced doctrine to go after somebody if they trample those rights. So laws have to be backed up with this forced doctrine as you're talking about. And I
Well,
think that
and
most
they
people
have to
just don't
be
even.
backed up the other way too. So remember, men uniquely are in a position to throw off any chains of conditionals they don't like collectively with force. Men can do that and have done that. We did it in this
Mhm.
nation. We've done it. I mean, all throughout the historic standard. If men find themselves in conditionals they don't like, they literally just kill everybody until they get to the conditionals that they like. That's actually what they do. But can't do that. They not only can't do that, but they have to rely on men to enforce that on their behalf. So it sounds like men should really be getting the big piece of chicken here. You're right. They should really be getting a little bit of due and respect in society for the fact that we're so benevolent. And by the way, I think if this is changed, they wouldn't be nearly as benevolent. If it was the case that men suddenly woke up tomorrow collectively and they were 2 to 3 times stronger than men, I don't think they would be nearly as benevolent towards men as men are towards.
Yeah, no, these ideas are pretty kind of earth shattering when you begin to really think about it, given the paradigm that we're in. And some of these debates that you've had have been pretty feisty, pretty spicy. People should go and check out, for example, the Tomi Lahren exchange that you had, or the Cenk Uygur exchange that you had. Do you see any commonalities with the talking heads and the sort of empty, vacuous, ungrounded worldviews that they argue for in terms of these exchanges and what we're talking about with
Yes,
rights?
they steal from Christians. They steal
Mhm.
from Christians across the board. They steal their entire worldview from Christians. They steal all forms of benevolence from Christians. They steal all the good stuff. And then they just want to add all the degeneracy in there. They want to sprinkle in the degeneracy while justifying it through our worldview. That's what's so crazy. They have no grounding foundation for anything. Tommy Lauren, for instance, told me that have no duties at all to men. No duties at all. Only men have duties the opposite direction. And by the way, Jay, we're born to have those duties according to her, right? So according to her and feminists like her, what men are is they're disposable income wallets. We get to pay for everything for. But don't worry about it, Jay, because we get to watch them enjoy them spending all of our money, right? That's how we're apparently hardwired, according to these people. But yes, they're stealing, they steal the Christian ethical worldview. That's what they do. All their concepts of harm, theft, everything, totally stolen from us. All of it stolen from us. And then what they do is they sprinkle in degeneracy as a new form of harm. If you don't let us be degenerate, that's harming us. Therefore, Christianity bad. It's the most convoluted and corrupted worldview that I've ever seen, and it's grounded on nothing. It's literally built on a house of sand. They can justify nothing, and they never have been able to justify anything.
Yeah, I think the most kind of surprising exchange that I saw you have was with Cenk Uygur because I thought at least he would bring some kind of leftist talking points, some kind of socialist argumentation, and all he did was like cuss you out and go after you personally. Really, I think showing that that guy's completely vacuous, completely bankrupt, no real, intellectual backing behind what he's saying at all. And that seems to be kind of a pattern of what
Yeah.
you and I both see in a lot of our debates is that these people are kind of like shells. They're really kind of fraudulent. They don't really have much behind them other than rhetoric.
Well, let me ask you a question. This is what I found from doing, I think at this point, several thousand debates with everyone, high profile, low profile, random people on Discord to Twitter, just like you do, right? Um, what I found is this: is that when you're talking about the liberal paradigm, the progressive paradigm, everybody operates within it. But the second you don't grant it, you say this worldview,
Mhm.
I'm not playing within this worldview. I'm playing with a different worldview. They're lost. They're done.
Yeah.
You have to actually, the only way that these people know how to communicate is if you already accept their preconceived notions of progressive and liberal worldviews. And if you don't accept
Right.
those, they're totally lost. Like if you started a debate, for instance, with a progressive, and you said, "Yeah, I'm going to come at this from a totally worldview," right, or something like this. Which even that I would argue is still a liberal worldview in a sense.
Right.
But the thing is like the second you move outside of their paradigm, now suddenly the things you don't think are they think are bad or not bad to you, the things they think are good or not good to you, all justification falls out the window. In other words, much like a vampire, you have to agree to invite the worldview in, right?
Yeah.
Or else, or
Great
else it
analogy.
doesn't
Yeah.
do anything. It does nothing, right? It does nothing. It just it falls flat immediately.
Another one of the characters that have had quite a few interactions with. I've been blessed actually to not have any interactions with this person. Is Destiny. What would you say about this figure? I mean, I don't understand why he's so popular, other than that he talks really fast and kind of pushes, I guess, degenerate ideas. But
Yeah,
what have
I
you
can tell you
noticed from
why.
your debates with this guy?
Well, Destiny was there first. He started at Justin TV before it became Twitch. Because he was one of the first doing what he was doing, he was able to accumulate a large audience. If Destiny came around today, I'm not even sure he would dispute that. But if he came about today and moved into
Hmm.
this, kind of ethosphere, he would be probably a low-level streamer. So, but if you're there first, as you know, generally speaking, you're able to kind of consolidate an audience, and he was there first. Now, as to his continued rise in popularity, he's dealing with all sorts of legal troubles at the moment. He's dealing with all sorts of different things, but he is an A tier debater. Or S tier debater, if you want to say it that way, on the left side. And the reason is he's really good at memorization of talking points, and he's really good
Hmm.
at regurgitation of them in a very quick way. However, when he goes up against people who are more in the logician form, he begins to fall flat. He avoids debates with those people generally like the plague. And he'll do this through the proposition itself by saying, "We look, I'm not going to agree to a proposition which can be falsified through logic." So, what these people like to do is they like to argue only within the paradigm of regurgitation of talking point. My paradigm right, your paradigm left, my talking point, your talking point, my talking point, your talking point. The second that's rejected, the second you're like, these talking points are nebulous and stupid and have no logical sense to them at all, these people fall apart. Destiny's no exception to that.